There are tons of stereotypes about British people, about the UK in general, about British culture, and some of them are true. Hi everyone, it's me. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alanna and I'm a Canadian, but I have been living here in the UK for the last 8 years. Now, I have had the absolute privilege to experience British culture with British people. I've had the privilege to work alongside British people, to live alongside British people. I got a British person in my house right now somewhere. And being able to experience life alongside British people, I feel like has really taught me a lot. And through these years, I have learned that some of the stereotypes you know about or read about online, or maybe it's in TV and movies, some of those stereotypes, they are real. So British people, leave a comment down below. What are some stereotypes either about British people or about British life that you think are actually true? So without further ado, let's go. Now, first up, we have a stereotype related to accents. Now, as a Canadian, I find Canada doesn't have a wide variety of accents considering the size compared to the UK. This person says, many have outlandish accents akin to a verbal doctor's signature. I couldn't agree more, especially living here early on. Now, I live in Kent. My partner is from Kent, that's why I'm in Kent. So I have been around this accent for 8 years. And while there is variety in Kent itself, there's not too much. And of course, I've then gone into London. You have sort of like this stereotypical London type accent. I hear that as well. So between those sort of areas, I feel fairly confident. But the problem with accents here is once you feel confident, that's when the magic happens. Because I'll call somebody up, or I will go someplace new, or I will come across a different type of British person here in Kent, and all of a sudden I realize, wow, actually, I'm not good with accents. You're lulled into a false sense of security. But as much as it is awkward and it can lead to some embarrassing situations when I really just don't know what the person is saying, particularly if they use slang or they slur their words, which, you know, sometimes happens. While it is embarrassing, and sometimes it feels like my life is just a bunch of embarrassing moments, like strung together, I do actually like this. It is a stereotype that I am happy exists because I find it gives British people and it gives the UK such character. Everybody sounds a little bit different for a fairly small, relatively small place. You know, when you come from Canada, the UK is tiny, and yet the voices are so different, and I do love it. It's a good stereotype to have. Another stereotype that is actually true, we love biscuits, what you call cookies. I think the UK has a great variety of biscuits. I am still trying them all, if you can believe it. 8 years later, I'm still discovering biscuits that I've not had before because there are a lot. But I think also it goes well with the tea culture. You know, you have a biscuit with your tea. Now, I'm still having coffee. It's morning time. Technically, I'm still working on my coffee. I'm still a coffee lady, but I had tea last night. So I'm like kind of British, but not quite. Drunk Brits abroad are probably why nobody likes us, beside the Yanks, but nobody likes them either. Spicy. Now, I do think the stereotype of drunk Brits abroad, there is some truth to that, right? It started for a reason, and the reason is it does happen. Now, not all Brits, but certainly some. And I'm sure watching this video, if you've ever been on holiday, British people, mainly British people watch these videos. If you've ever been on holiday, maybe you're at a resort or something, and you see these like wild drunk people, and you're like, oh my God, that's so embarrassing. And then you hear them speak, and you're like, oh no, they're British. I actually was thinking about doing a video on this, but I kind of chickened out. It's on my computer. Maybe we'll get to it at some point. Have a seat. Let me read this to you. The world seems to think firearms in the UK are banned. They are not. Handguns are legal to own for protection in Northern Ireland, and shotgun, rifles, automatic weapons are accessible in the rest of the UK after obtaining a license. To get a license, you submit your application to the police. The police come to your house, chat with you, assess you. They even contact your GP for any mental health issues. Then they check you have a safe place to store the weapon, come to your house again, go through months of background checks again, and maybe then they'll give you a permit. Now, the idea of like guns or a gun culture is something that's very interesting to me because it is very different. And this is kind of the idea I was going to do for my video about how different countries view guns in terms of culture. So in Canada, we do have guns, we have rifles, but they are primarily for hunting. So I actually knew a family who still goes up north. You know, it's a very like family bonding activity. They go up north and you can like rent a cabin or something, and then they go hunting for deer or whatever. I've never done it, but I know people who do. And they would bring back what they shot, typically deer. I remember deer. There might be other stuff, but deer primarily. And then they would like have that animal butchered. I don't think they did it themselves. I think they would take it to a place, but we would end up with like venison steaks and venison sausages, and we would consume what they hunted, which some people may find offensive. I don't. I think what's more offensive is just killing things just for sport. Now, of course, again, poor America is stuck in a different situation entirely. And unfortunately, I think while almost every American that I know personally would much prefer to have stricter gun control, would have changes to the gun laws, they would much prefer that. While every American I know thinks that way, unfortunately, I think they are at a situation where it's just almost impossible to change. But then you bring the UK into the mix. I think the UK is much more similar to Canada with regards to guns. It is more difficult to get them. There's more of a like hunting sport type element to them rather than like a defense situation, which you usually see more in the US. But yeah, it's a tricky topic. There's a lot of regulations and there's a lot of passion involved. So I did prep this video. I didn't get very far into it, and then I shelved it. So maybe we'll come back to it at some point. But it is interesting to see how guns are portrayed in different cultures and how the people relate to guns themselves. Is it part of their personality? Is it just an extra thing to do for fun? Is it something that most people don't even think about? I find it very interesting. This British person thinks this stereotype is in fact not true. British people being polite is way off. We're a bunch of arseholes. I politely disagree. I do think the stereotype that British people are polite is true. Now, not all of them, of course. Not all of them, but most of them. If you go into my YouTube comments, you will find people who are not polite. And pretty much 90% of my viewers are British. So we have to assume that some British people are not polite. But I will say, contrary to the internet, contrary to YouTube comment sections, because you gotta take all that with a grain of salt, it's the Wild West down there. In my regular life, the people that I deal with every day, the people that I deal with one-off, you know, they have all been very polite. You get the odd person who's a bit weird about foreigners. You just take it, right? But I politely disagree with this British person. I think the stereotype that Brits are genuinely polite is true. I'll stand by that. But God help me, if you guys are really rude in the comments, I'm gonna look stupid. What is another stereotype that is true? I think a lot of you are probably gonna comment it, is queuing. To the point where there is a Wikipedia article called The Queue, which is about how we were all very organized after the death of the late Queen Elizabeth. For those few people who don't know what we're talking about, there is a Wikipedia page about the queue that happened for British people to view Queen Elizabeth after she died. I'd have to Google what the final number was, if they have a number of like how many people went to view Queen Elizabeth, because the queue itself was like days long. And it was so deeply organized. You'd think there'd just be pandemonium, right? Like millions of people in London, like trying to see the Queen. It was so deeply organized. and honestly, deeply British. I've never seen anything like it, and I might never see it again. Now, this person has a few stereotypes they believe to be true. Queuing, of course, dry humor, and liking underdog stories. Now, I think most people would like an underdog story. I think that's just like part of being a human. You like to see the underdog win. I don't think that's necessarily a British thing. Queuing, of course, like we've mentioned, and dry humor. Now, humor in the UK is one of my favorite things, and it's really hard to explain. How do you quantify the sense of humor of an entire population? But I will say, I love the sense of humor here. I find British people very funny. There is definitely a dry sense of humor. There's also like quite a dark sense of humor as well that I think could be quite surprising to people who aren't used to it. I do think that the sense of humor here is very similar to Canada. And like historically that makes sense if you look at the ties between our two nations, right? But it just kind of feels like a next level here. So thankfully, as a Canadian moving here, it wasn't too much of a shock, but it was still pretty wild, especially like my first job, I worked at a college in an office, and there was like, I don't know, 30 of us in this office. And the sense of humor of a variety of people in there was so interesting to observe. And I think I learned so much from that job, and just like kind of almost like a fly on the wall, like just watching how these British people interact with each other and the jokes that they would make at work and how they would speak to each other at work. Maybe your office is similar, maybe it is the opposite. But the sense of humor was very, very interesting. We do say sorry a lot. You and me both. Goes hand in hand with being polite is to apologize a lot. I do think this is true. Again, not for everybody, but it's something that you will see mirrored in Canada. A lot of British quirks, while they're not explicitly replicated in Canada or like identical in Canada, you can kind of see like a mirror image of it. So the sense of humor, you can see it very similar in Canada, and saying sorry and being like overly polite, you can see it in Canada. I have accidentally walked into a door and apologized. I was at the mall and I walked into a mannequin and I apologized. That is a very Canadian thing to do, but British people do it as well. Again, it just goes hand in hand with being polite, right? You just gotta apologize all the time, even if it's not your fault. We drink lots of tea and mostly agree that crumpets are amazing. I do agree that the UK is predominantly still a tea drinking nation, although I think it's getting close and close to being more evenly split between tea and coffee. I'm a coffee girly. I think North America is largely coffee, really. I had never drank tea at home. My parents didn't drink tea. That was just not a thing. My parents were coffee drinkers. And here I am, drinking a coffee. Like the idea of going out to a cafe in Canada, I've never been with anyone who's ordered a tea. I don't think I've ever. Does that make sense? Like you go to a cafe for lunch or something, or for a coffee, and you get a coffee and you have lunch and a coffee, but I've never actually been with anyone who ordered a tea. And yet actually the other day, my friend and I went to a cafe to work in the afternoon, like work from home, but work from a cafe. And she ordered a tea. How British. I definitely drink more tea in the wintertime though. I am a seasonal tea drinker. I'm not really drinking tea in the summertime or even in the spring, really. But in the wintertime, like last night, it was dark and miserable. The sun set at like 4 p.m. And it's just miserable outside. It's raining and I'm cold and I'm miserable. And I had a cup of tea. And you know what? It made life a little bit better. Another stereotype that comes up a lot is about teeth, which I find very interesting. Now, in North America, and I'm so sorry to admit this, there is a stereotype that British people have terrible teeth. And I'm so sorry that that exists. It's not nice, is it? Can confirm the teeth stereotype is mostly BS, but it is true that we are not that arsed about artificial whitening or straightening teeth when it may be unnecessary. Not to say there aren't many Brits who don't. The biggest distinction I have with teeth is kind of what this person is touching on. So in North America, and I think when I researched this, because I was again gonna do a video on it, when I researched it, it was a lot about like Hollywood influence. So actors and people on screen, TV, whatever, would need to have nice, white, straight teeth. And I think like osmosis, the rest of us were like, that is the epitome of health, right? You are healthy and you are attractive when you have nice, white, straight teeth. Doesn't matter if your teeth are healthy or not, but visually they look healthy to us. Whereas I find in the UK, it's less about the aesthetics of your teeth. Like if your teeth are healthy and they're not straight, okay, like who cares? They're healthy. What else do you want? I think this point though is changing with the times. It's easier to get braces or like a Invisalign, you know, those things that you can't even really see, the braces. That's Invisalign, isn't it? Or something like that. It's more accessible, it's cheaper, it's just more readily available. So I do think British people are perhaps leaning towards that a little bit more than in the past, where in the past it was very much like, if your teeth are healthy, then it doesn't matter. For me, I was a braces girly. Loved that for me. I had braces for 2 years, and not the cute invisible ones, the bright silver full mouth. I had elastics because my jaw was kind of funny. The whole works. I think this was from when I was like 14 to 16. It was a tough time for me. But as things are getting more accessible and they're cheaper to make and cheaper to have, I think more people will have a Invisalign. I don't know how to say that word. Or teeth whitening, you know, it's just like cheaper, it's easier now. I think more people will have it. Just humble opinion. I'm not a professional. Completely unrelated, but I had an orthodontist, right? Like that's where I got my braces, was the orthodontist. And I remember them saying that I was gonna have to get headgear if I didn't take care of my braces. And I don't know if you know, headgear is like, as it sounds, I'd had the braces in, but I'd also have to like wear something. And they said it sort of like offhand, like you might need headgear. And I went home and cried, and I was terrified that I was gonna have to get headgear. Like I literally could not go to school with headgear. I would simply pass away. But thankfully it never came to that. I think that was just them like inadvertently threatening me to make sure I took care of my braces. Another British stereotype that is in fact true has to do with the weather. You guessed it, didn't you? We really do talk about the weather a lot, but it's for good reason. We have to plan ahead. Over here, weather can fluctuate so much that sometimes if you're going outside for a long day, you may need to pack wellies and an umbrella, sunscreen and a sun hat, and a woolly jumper and a thermos of tea, particularly in April and May. I agree with this. Canada is very similar. We can have days, especially in the changing of seasons, we can have days where it snows. I'm not joking, it'll snow in the morning, but by the end of the day, you're in shorts. So I know what it means to have changing weather. I think it's also kind of like a polite, safe ground. British people stereotype that they're polite. Yes, I agree. Stereotype that they talk about weather and they like the weather. Yes, I agree. But I also think those things kind of go hand in hand. So you find yourself in literally any situation where you may need to do small talk with somebody. What do you talk about? You don't want to be impolite and talk about like money or their work or politics, God forbid. So you talk about the weather. Because it's a very easy, safe ground. Safe? It's a safe ground. And I do this now when in doubt. When a little bit anxious about what to talk about, I just say, oh, you know, it's been so rainy lately today, hasn't it? But I heard it's supposed to warm up next week. Wouldn't that be nice? British people are a varied and funny bunch. And honestly, it has been a privilege to live among them these last 8 years. If you'd like to watch more content, which would be totally awesome, I want to check out this one, British things that just make sense. Except not really. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, bye!